Welcome into 5-Wide Fantasy. Today we're getting into running back rankings for week 6 of the fantasy football season, helping you set your lineups for this week at the running back position. Should talk about basically every single player. I'll have my top 30, and then I'll have as well some players that will miss the top 30. And then if I miss any, be sure to ask those questions in the comments down below. Happy to answer them. But again, this is like half PPR formats. If you guys are asking which running back you should start, just look at the rankings. I'm not going to answer your comment. That means you weren't watching the video, so I'm not going to give you an answer in the comment section. Just look at the rankings. That'll help you with setting your lineups. Again, today's video brought to you by the STUNT. If you guys do want personalized fantasy advice for your teams at all positions, we're live 4 to 5 Eastern time on Fridays on the STUNT. I'm answering all of your questions. You can jump into the live room, drop your comment in the chat, or you can step up on stage and we can talk face-to-face. So let's get into these rankings. Again, the top 30 at the position. At number 1, Christian McCaffrey, a guy that's been scoring touchdowns in, 16 straight games, something ridiculous. Got the Browns this week. Definitely a tough matchup. They're number 4 in fantasy points allowed to running backs this season. They're first in rush EPA. So definitely a really tough defense. A very difficult test here for this offense, but one that they've passed with flying colors each and every week. We saw it last week against the Cowboys, who at the time were the number 1 defense in fantasy points allowed to running backs. So no concern here for McCaffrey. He's going to be number 1 because he's scoring touchdowns each and every week. At 2 is Tony Pollard. Pollard's got the Chargers this week on Monday night. Should be an opportunity for him to get things back on track. Volume is always good for him. He just hasn't converted red zone opportunities. This red zone offense has really struggled. The Chargers, though, a defense you do want to play if you're running back. 23rd in fantasy points allowed to the position, 24th in rushing EPA. 3, Bijan Robinson. Robinson's got the Commanders this week, who I do respect as a run defense, but a lot of the numbers here don't have them as a top-tier unit. 15th in run defense grade from PFF, 14th in fantasy points allowed to running back. So not a team you should be too worried about, and Robinson's role in this offense is very secure, especially receiving game has looked great, but also just having now that pretty major edge over Tyler Algier in the rushing game too. 4, Raheem Mostert. I've seen some other rankings that have had him, maybe top 12 or outside the top 12. I don't see any reason not to have him in your top 5 this week. Carolina is one of the best matchups for running backs this season. 31st in fantasy points allowed to the position, 29th in EPA against the run, 29th in PFF's run defense grade. Good secondary, really bad front 7. A lot of teams are able to run really successfully against this team. No different here for Mostert because the Dolphins have been one of the most efficient rushing games in the league, whether it's him or Achane, and with Achane missing time, Mostert is in for a big week here. 5, Austin Eckler. Looks like he's going to be back this week. Had the bye week as well for that little extra rest. He said he's 99% sure he'll be back for Monday night. I'm going to go with he is going to be back. The Chargers rushing game has been non-existent without him. They haven't been throwing the ball to their running backs at all either, but now that Eckler's back in the fold, that will certainly change, especially now with Mike Williams out for the season. He's going to be plenty involved in the receiving game, I think, as well. The Cowboys moved now to 13th in fantasy points allowed to the position, 6th in EPA. This definitely isn't an easy matchup. That's why I don't have Eckler here and like my number 2 guy, which he probably will be most weeks, but here a bit more difficult of a matchup, so a little bit less hesitant to get him immediately into the top 2. 6, Kyren Williams. Arizona, a great matchup for running backs. Williams has the entire share here of this offense in the running game, the receiving game, inside the 5. I think he has the highest share of red zone snaps, I think it was 2nd or 3rd highest share in red zone snaps amongst running backs this season. I mean, you get a good matchup. The volume's too good to not have this guy being near the top. Arizona, 28th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, 25th in rushing EPA. 7, Travis Etienne. Etienne's got Indianapolis this week. The Colts have kind of fallen off a little bit this season, not as elite of a group against the run. They're 22nd in fantasy points allowed to the position, 11th in EPA against the run. Etienne's role, very secure here, and has looked really good the last couple of weeks as well. Getting involved in the receiving game too. We're going to see Tank Bigsby come in some situations you might not love, but Etienne right now, super efficient and getting the ball plenty, so love him there. Derrick Henry comes in at 8. The Ravens are definitely a tough matchup for running backs right now. 9th in fantasy points allowed are the Ravens, 3rd in rushing EPA. But again, bad matchups are still going to have Henry being a top 12 guy for me with the volume that he receives in this offense, and any points that they might score are probably going to be in benefit to him or see him being the one scoring those touchdowns. So Henry's going to be a guy that in tough matchups, he can move somewhere to like the 12 for me, but pretty consistently will be still in as an RB1. 9 is Kenneth Walker against Cincinnati. The Bengals defense both against the pass and the run, hasn't been one to be too concerned about. So I do still feel confident in Walker moving forward. Right now in the season, the Bengals are 20th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. They are 27th in rushing EPA. So a good matchup here for Walker. Volume is still solid. Definitely a reliable piece of this offense. They're running the ball a fair bit more than they were last season, which is a great sign for him rest of the season. 10, Isaiah Pacheco. Pacheco in a great matchup as well. Denver this week. Denver's dead last in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Pacheco's role has looked really, really nice. Like, he's a player that if people still aren't respecting him as a potential top 12 guy, you could be looking to buy him still, because he has very vast share of the rushing opportunities, and he's been leading the team in routes run amongst their running backs pretty consistently. So love his role here, and in a really plus matchup, definitely a good chance to find the end zone. 31st in EPA against the run, the Broncos are. 11, Alvin Kamara. Kamara getting plenty of volume in this offense, receiving game, rushing game. Condre Miller saw some snaps last week in a major blowout, but I think in competitive games, we're still going to see plenty of Alvin Kamara. It's not going to be very efficient in the running game, but opportunities are there for him to be a top 12 guy this week against this Houston defense. 25th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, 31st in PFF's run defense grade. So one that Kamara could find some efficiency here to go with that great volume. 12, wrapping up the top 12 at the position, David Montgomery. Got the Buccaneers this week. The Bucs, I still think, are a very solid run defense. They're 11th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, 16th in EPA against the run, so more middle of the road, not an elite unit right now. But for Montgomery, the reason I slid him a little bit back here is I think it will be tougher, efficiency-wise, a little bit tougher to score touchdowns, but he's going to get all of those opportunities. So right now, pretty set in stone as a top 12 guy, even in some of the more difficult matchups because of how good this Lions offense is operating right now. Now we move into the top 24, starting with Joe Mixon as my RB13 on the week. Seattle taking a major step forward in their run defense. They're first in PFF's run defense grade, 7th in rush EPA, middle of the road, 16th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Definitely something to monitor here with the Seahawks. They might be a team moving forward that aren't quite the positive matchup they were last year for running backs. Mixon, though, his share in the offense is at that elite level where he's heavily the most utilized guy in the receiving game, getting all of the opportunities when it comes to short yardage, when it comes to early downs, when it comes to red zone, when it comes to inside the 5. So even in down weeks, even in weeks in tough matchups, I'm still going to have him as an easy top 24 guy. 14, DeAndre Swift. Swift had a little bit better efficiency last week against the Vikings. Got the Jets this week. The Jets are 21st in fantasy points allowed to running backs, 11th in run defense grade. They're a team that isn't bad against the run, but a lot of teams looking to move the football on the ground because of how good the pass defense is. And for the Eagles here, really think the Jets will struggle offensively when you take away their rushing game because of how good the Eagles' run defense is and having to work through Zach Wilson. So the Eagles should handle business here and give that game script for Swift to get the ball quite a bit in this matchup. 15, Saquon Barkley, playing off the fact that I think he's going to play this week. I'm still not completely sure because obviously he wasn't even really a game time decision for the Giants last week. So I'm a bit more tempered here. I think if we get confirmation early in the week that he's going to play, he'll be more in my top 12 because Buffalo isn't a matchup to be too scared about, but they're 14-point underdogs in this game. 24th in fantasy points allowed are the Bills this season, 17th in EPA against the run. So definitely not a unit to be too scared of. Now with Matt Milano out as well, this is a Bills defense that's really losing a lot of bodies and important bodies. So we could see the Giants find some success if Barkley is back. 16, James Cook. Got those same Giants. The Giants are definitely a great matchup for running backs. They're 29th in fantasy points allowed to the position, 30th in run defense grade, 28th in EPA against the run. For Cook right now, coming off a really down week, Latavius Murray and Damian Harris are getting involved. That keeps me hesitant from wanting to have him being one of my top 8, 9 guy or top 10 guy this week, just because of that share of these opportunities, which is really, really annoying. But for a great matchup, he should get back to being one of the most efficient guys in the league like he's been most of this season. So still very much like him. 17, Josh Jacobs. The Patriots, I think, are a solid run defense, 5th in EPA against the run, top 10 in run defense grade from PFF. Haven't been as good fantasy points-wise, but that Dolphins matchup earlier in the season is really skewing things here. So definitely think it's a tough matchup for Jacobs. Efficiency hasn't been there regardless of opponent. The Packers were a really plus matchup, still average less than 4 yards per carry. So not a running back that is running efficiently because his offensive line has not been blocking well whatsoever. You haven't given him a lot of chances here. He's been hit at the line a ton. Should get the ball still quite a bit. Involvement in the receiving game elevates him here. But right now, this is a player that you shouldn't have the same expectations of last season. 18, Brian Robinson. Robinson gets Atlanta this week. Atlanta's a team that I'm not confident starting my running backs against. They're 5th in fantasy points allowed, 2nd in EPA against the run. Just very difficult to move the ball. We saw Pierce really struggle last week as well. But for Robinson, his involvement is really, really solid. Any positive game scripts, they're getting the ball at a very high volume, and he's still getting some involvement in the receiving game as well. Touchdown opportunities are definitely going to go to him, so he's still a weekly start for the time being. 19, Dameon Pierce. Pierce has got New Orleans this week, another tough matchup as well, but his volume is so good. We talked about this when we were talking keep, trade, cut yesterday. His share of the rushing work, his share of the opportunities is that elite level. The Saints have been good. I'm not sure if the Saints are legit. They're 12th in EPA against the run, so not quite as good compared to, 2nd in fantasy points allowed to running backs. If Houston is in a positive game script, if they aren't in a positive game script, they're still going to feed him the football quite a bit. So I like going off the volume here to keep him as an RB2. 20, Ramondre Stevenson. The Raiders, a matchup you can run the football against this team. 17th in fantasy points allowed, 21st in EPA against the run. Stevenson, yes, is ceding opportunities to Ezekiel Elliott, but Ramondre is still the number one guy here for this offense. So I think there's an opportunity here to run the ball efficiently. Stevenson will get the majority of opportunities. Yes, he split the rushes evenly last week in a major blowout, so it's tougher to get a read on truly how they're going to split this up in a more neutral game script, and Stevenson is still running more routes. So a matchup here where I'll go back to Stevenson after a couple of tough weeks. 21, Rachaad White. White's got Detroit this week. Detroit firmly entrenched for me as a very difficult matchup for running backs. 3rd in fantasy points allowed, top 10 in EPA against the run, 3rd in PFF's run defense grade. This is just a really good unit that's been very good at keeping running backs to a really low efficiency, and that's what White has been all season. Incredibly inefficient, getting a lot of opportunities. Reliance here for White will definitely be on the receiving game, and hopefully if you get a couple touched opportunities inside the red zone that he can maybe potentially convert, but I am definitely lower on him this week. 22, Jonathan Taylor. Taylor's got Jacksonville, another tough run defense. Look, a lot of these guys we're going to talk about in this tier are tough matchups, but we got to rank them in terms of this top 30 here to get you to set your lineups. Jacksonville's 6th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. We saw, obviously, the Bills on Sunday morning really struggle to run the football. So I definitely think it's a difficult matchup for Indy here. But with Gardner Minshew at quarterback, it's going to be more traditional running game. You're not going to see Anthony Richardson taking away opportunities to score touchdowns or taking away some rushing work. So I still think Taylor's a guy you do want to start. I know it was a really down week last week. He's still going to have, moving forward, the majority share of rushing opportunities in this offense. So they'll still think you can start him. I just wouldn't have the expectations of, what he's been in seasons past. 23, Jerome Ford. Ford is the guy for for Cleveland here. They want him to be their number one option. They're utilizing him as such. San Francisco's not a very fun matchup. He could see a lot of check down work here in the receiving game. And San Francisco, some of these numbers don't indicate them being elite, 20th in EPA against the run, but they're 8th in fantasy points allowed. I know this is an elite front. It's going to be difficult to run the ball. But if Deshaun Watson is playing, this is where my expectations are for Ford as a guy who might be in an opportunity to see at home a little more neutral game script, a little bit more rushing opportunities, and then obviously the involvement in the receiving game. And then the expectation here of this game being a little bit tighter with it being at home. This needs to be Deshaun Watson starting. If he's not playing, I'm not playing Jerome Ford because Dorian Thompson-Robinson not going to cut it in terms of being able to support this offense much. 24, Alexander Mattison. Madison's a player. Expectations for me are pretty adjusted now. Rest of season, Cam Akers getting some involvement last week and looking basically the same. So we could see these guys split a lot of their work. It is a good matchup, so I do still want to start Madison. 30th in fantasy points allowed to running backs on the season that Chicago is. 14th in EPA. They're not a bad defense against the run. They're more middle of the road. It's just a lot of teams have had some positive game scripts and given the ball to their backs quite a bit. So like Madison here, don't absolutely love him though. All right, moving into the top 30, some of these guys that could potentially be flex options for you. Some players I'm probably worried about starting, but I could still see you starting with Breece Hall. Talked about this. The Eagles, the best run defense in the NFL right now, number one in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Hall coming off a massive week. I know it'd be crazy. Some of you might think it's crazy to sit him coming off of that. He had the easiest matchup you could possibly have against the Broncos, and now he gets the most difficult matchup you could have against the Eagles for a bad offense. Like, this is a team that probably won't be in a lot of scripts be able to run the football. They're pretty significant underdogs in this game. Very worried about Hall because efficiency-wise, it'll be really, really difficult. Opportunity-wise, it will probably be very, very little. So Hall's a player I do want to sit, but RB25, you can definitely still start him on the week, just don't have a lot of confidence in doing so. 26, Roschon Johnson. With Khalil Herbert's departure, we're going to see Roschon Johnson entrenched into that number one role here for Chicago. Yes, we're going to probably see Deonta Foreman on the field a little bit, but Johnson being the guy that they're dressing early on in the season as a rookie and having Foreman be healthy and active tells me everything I need to know. Johnson will definitely be involved as the primary receiving back here, and I do expect him to be the number one guy running the football. It might not be by a significant margin, but it will still be him. Minnesota, though, tough matchup, 10th in fantasy points allowed to running backs in the season. They're 13th in EPA, 12th in run defense grade. The Vikings stack the box a ton, so it makes running efficiently pretty difficult here. But for Johnson, the opportunity should be enough that you could potentially start him this week. I would lean against it, but he is in my top 30. 27, Miles Sanders. Miami, definitely a pretty decent matchup here, but we're into a time here for this Carolina Panthers offense where both Sanders and Hubbard are splitting these opportunities pretty evenly. Sanders with a slight edge in my mind. So he is a startable asset. Miami isn't the most difficult of matchups, but it is a team offensively that will definitely outpace Carolina. So the script here for Sanders to get decent volume in this game when he's splitting opportunities will be difficult. At 28, Zach Moss. Moss has been fantastic this season. I just don't get why the Colts gave Jonathan Taylor a contract if they can prove out the fact that with Zach Moss, they can run the ball efficiently, effectively, and win football games doing it. With Moss's success so far in the season, he's a player I got no problem going back to. There's no way that he's not going to be involved, at least at a margin that you could potentially start, maybe 10, 11 touches in this game. And with the way he's running it, you could get enough value here. But again, a tough matchup like we talked about with Taylor earlier. 29 is Chuba Hubbard. Same deal with Sanders here. He's splitting opportunities with Sanders in a matchup that is pretty decent for running backs. Miami's 26th in EPA against the run, so you can run the football against them. It's just about whether or not and how long the Carolina Panthers can stay in this game to be able to justify running the football. So I'm not high on Hubbard this week, but much like Moss, he's probably going to get maybe even a little bit more. He could see between 12 to 14 touches in this game, and that could be enough for you really at this point with the running back position. 30 is Latavius Murray. Bit of an out there play here for you guys, but Murray is their guy inside the 5 and scoring touchdowns, and the Giants are going to give them plenty of opportunities to be able to do just that. So I could justify playing Murray this week. It is a very risky play, but the Giants have given up a ton of touchdowns to running backs. If with the Bills being 14-point favorites in this game, there's going to be, killing clock, milking this lead, taking care of the football, and Murray will probably be involved there late game to get maybe like 8 to 10 touches, and at least a few of those are probably going to be in the red zone. So that could be enough for you. And he'll be a player that I'll add off the wire and start if I'm really in a bind with some bye weeks and whatnot. That's why he's in my top 30. All right, some players that are outside of my rankings this week. Any of those Denver running backs. KC's been very good against the run. Denver's a pretty big underdog in this game by almost 10 points, and they're going to be the split here of Jaleel McLaughlin, Javonte Williams, if he's healthy, Samaje Perine makes this backfield completely invaluable. The Ravens running backs, not going to play any of them. If you had to play one, Justice Hill's my RB31, Gus Edwards my RB35. Tennessee, one of the best run defenses in the league this season. Baltimore will probably still get the ball of these guys. It'll be very tough efficiency-wise, and Hill's been the most involved in the receiving game, so I'd give him the slight edge. Guy like Cam Akers, my RB33. Look, I think Akers will get some decent involvement here. It is a pretty decent matchup, but I don't know if it's going to be enough to be able to justify playing him. Amari DeMarcado is my RB33 this week. The Rams are a tough matchup. We could see the return of Keontae Ingram, so I'm a little bit more hesitant with Ingram potentially getting in the fold of how much is he involved. I think DeMarcado will have the edge, but will it be enough in a game here against the Rams? Guys like Zeke Elliott also outside my rankings. If there's anyone else I missed, feel free to drop those down below in the comments. Happy to answer them, give you my thoughts on these guys. I don't think I really missed anyone major, but if there's someone that you want to get my thoughts on and what the risk is in starting them. Is there some upside? Answer those in the comments down below, so definitely drop them. And as well, be sure to download the Stunt. I don't think I mentioned that off the top. The link will be down below in the description. I'll put in the pinned comments. I'll answer all of your fantasy questions. If you want to know start sit at all the positions for this coming week, if you want some trade advice, some advice on what to do rest of season with your team, I'll do that 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern time on the Stunt on Fridays. So be sure to join us there. Again, link will be down below to download the app both on Android and iOS. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.